Hey, everybody. In today's episode, we're going to explore the defense side of this tall tale. Yeah. We've heard from the victim. We're now going to hear from the defendant. And what he has to say is quite interesting. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm Rebecca, your host, and I recap live trials. This trial is one that I actually went to in person rather than, court TV or law and crime. I actually attended this one in person in the Sedgwick County Courthouse. The defendant, and I apologize ahead of time, I have a bad cold, so we're going to get through this, but it's going to be heavily edited when I start coughing. So, 29-year-old Kaylin Jackson, who is a Kansas City resident, is charged with aggravated rape, aggravated sodomy, aggravated burglary, aggravated domestic violence, and aggravated, assault. Anyway, lots of charges, 5 charges. So we've heard from the victim, and it seems like it's a very sad tale, but there's always 2 sides to a story. And in this story, the jury is going to have to decide who is more credible, because those 2 people were the only people in the room when this occurred. There were no cameras, no witnesses. You just have these 2 people saying what occurred that day. So, but there's other evidence we're going to look at. So Kaylin has no criminal history. 29-year-old. I'm going to call him a kid. I'm old. He seems like a baby to me. He's known the victim for 18 years. Since they were like 5 or 6, but they became intimate around 2015. So in high school, they became intimate. But after high school, she went off to college. This was in Kansas City. So after high school, she goes off to college. Then, because of a boyfriend or something, she moves back to Wichita. After college, she goes to Wichita, and they start having this on again, off again relationship, the victim and the defendant. And they're often texting each other, calling each other. They'll be off for a while, and then one of them will reach out, and then they'll be on again. And this has gone on for a long time, and they're always entertaining the idea of having a relationship. But it doesn't materialize because the defendant is not willing to move to Wichita. He's got his brother living with him. His brother has multiple sclerosis, and it's just not possible. I have to take care of him, and I can't have you living with me because it's just not going to work out. And she was not willing to move to Kansas City. So this relationship never materialized, but they remained friends, and they would have this on again, off again thing. So, and most of the time when they were off, it was because of the distance, or maybe they would have a minor argument. But from July of 2023 to October, they were on again. And it was during this period of time, my understanding from sitting in the courtroom is that there were a lot of text messages that the jury did not get to see. Neither did I, but so there were a few that they did get to see, and those were the ones in August, where they are having this discussion about she likes to read these dark romance books, and they're about CNC, and she recommends a book to him, and it is called Haunting Adeline. Now, you know me, I got to look up this book. Yes. Let me just read something to you. All right. So The Haunting Adeline is the second in a series of books about this cat and mouse. so to speak. That's what they call each other. So the summary for the first book, it's called Satan's Affair. Let me read this to you. Every Halloween, Satan's Affair will come to you. We travel the country offering terrifying haunted houses, thrilling rides, and the tastiest food. And within every passing town, I cleanse the world one execution at a time. I hide within the walls, casting my judgment for those that reek of evil, singing lullabies to their rotting souls. Once you've been chosen, there's no escaping my henchmen. They cater to my every desire. You can run and you can hide, but it only excites me. Come, take a walk through my dollhouse, where your screams will blend and your cute little pleas will go unanswered. But I can't promise it'll be over quickly. It's described as exciting, psychological, scary suspense. So, but suffice it to say that I'm reading The Haunting Adeline, and this guy is stalking this woman. She moves into her great-grandmother's home she inherits, and roses start appearing out of nowhere, when all her doors are locked, and how did it get there? And that's as far as I've got really in the book. But so this is the book that she, the victim, recommended to the defendant to read. And he does. He doesn't read it, but he listens to it on Audible. And she said she doesn't read the hard copy. She reads them on Kindle and Amazon as well. But they would discuss these books, and he agreed with everything she had to say on the stand. She said she wanted to try this sometime. He talked about how he had a prior sexual experience that he told her about, where this woman already had all these things in her home, including some kind of swing contraption that you hung from the doorway. And he admitted, no, that wasn't a particular rape fantasy, but apparently this book, Haunting Adeline, there's a rape element to it, a consensual rape element to it. So he said they would talk pretty much every day on the phone. Then on October 3rd, he reached out to her again. He wanted to cut off contact because he said she was giving him mixed signals, and it really wasn't an option for them to live together. So he just texted her and said, how about you don't contact me anymore? Don't say you love me anymore. So I got to believe there was more to that story than what we're hearing or what the jury is hearing. But in any case, by November, he misses her now. About 6 weeks later, he reaches out again and texts her on his phone saying, hey. Well, he forgot that he blocked her. So she can't respond, and she doesn't respond. But she goes over to Facebook and adds him as a friend. He accepts the friend request, and she says, hey, you got me blocked. So he unblocks her on the phone, and then they start exchanging these text messages. Now, the Facebook messages are something that the victim never told the police about. And that's where all these, there's a lot of Facebook messages. Anyway, where they're discussing this sexual fantasy. So on that day in November 18th, he did not tell her he was coming to Wichita, because one of the issues he says she had with him is that he wasn't spontaneous enough. And so he thought, I'm going to be spontaneous. I'm going to drive over there. So he drives over to Wichita. This is what he said. She had issues of him not going out of his way to please her. So he wanted to go over there, have makeup sex with her, and okay. So when he gets to Wichita, he calls her, and they have this 7-minute conversation. This is the same conversation that she could not describe with any clarity to me. as a potential juror. So he says, during this phone call, I let her know, hey, I'm in Wichita. I'm here to see you. And that's when they start having this C&C discussion. And, he makes it clear he's coming over. She had given him her address before, so he had her address. He'd never been there, but he had her address. So he told her that he was in town. She was receptive. She invited him over. When he gets there, he knocked on the exterior door, and it was locked. Now, I don't know if they had decided he would just come in, I don't know. But the exterior door is locked. So he calls her. And this is the missed call that she gets on her phone at 9:33, because at that same time, her blink, it wasn't a Ring camera, it was a blink camera. Her blink camera goes off on her phone. So she knows someone's at her door. And according to the defendant, she knows he's coming over. So she gets up, comes and looks out the blinds, and she sees him, and she says, oh, hold on, I've got to put the dog away. So she puts the dog away, and then she goes and she opens the door for him. She never looked at her phone to see who was at the door when it went off. She just went and looked out the blinds, according to the defendant. She has a Siberian Husky. So she opens both doors. They come in. Now, one of the things he said about this phone conversation, whenever they would talk, they had nicknames for each other. He would call her, I have to get this right because it's not the same as in the book. He called her Kitty Cat, and she would call him Little Mouse. Now, in the book, the stalker calls the victim that lives in the haunted house Little Mouse. But whatever. So this is pet names that they had for each other based on this book that they had in common. I can't wait to get to the good part in the book. They talked about having C&C with each other. And he says, I'm not an aggressive guy. So when I come in, I greet her. I give her a kiss. And I said to her, I'm not sure how we're going to do this, how do you want to start this? So she grabs him by the arms and says, he has to be forceful like this. He pushes her and was seated on the couch. He pushed her and she was seated on the couch. Now, he doesn't know the layout of this house. She led him towards the couch, according to him. So at this point, it's getting a little graphic, guys. So put your earbuds in. He rips open her shorts and he starts to pleasure her. So he said he was led to the couch. She had her legs up on his shoulders. This is all in front of the jury. This poor guy is having to recount this. He stood up. He pulls his pants down. And then at that point, she starts giving him oral sex. And they did show the shorts to the jury. And the shorts clearly have, at the seam, it's been ripped. There's a big gaping rip in the shorts, consistent with his testimony. So after she gives him oral sex, then they both stand up. She takes off her shorts. He takes off his pants. They both still have their shirts on. He still has his socks on. I'm sorry. Guys, take your socks off if you're going to have sex. That always drove me crazy. I had a boyfriend that would do that. Left his socks on. I'm like, oh no, sir. Those socks are coming off. I don't know. It just drove me nuts. Like, you're naked, but you have a pair of socks on. No, take the socks off. Anyway, I digress. So she then turns around, gets up on her knees, puts her arms on the back of the couch, and they start having sex. And then they change position a few times, and it's at some point where she's on her back, and then she turns over and she's on her stomach again on the couch, and he gets a conscience. Like all of a sudden, he starts thinking about this girlfriend that he's got back home. And he said it was a new relationship. They weren't in love, but it was something fairly new. But then he, in the middle of this sex, he just stops and he says, "Listen, now I got to tell you something." And he starts telling her that he has a girlfriend. And he says she didn't take it very well. She starts crying and says she's got to go outside to get some air. So this is when you see her leaving the house. Now, we saw the surveillance footage of her leaving the house. When she leaves that house, remember I told you, she was not running. She just walks out of the house and heads towards the neighbors. So a few seconds later, you see, he said, I put my pants back on, picked up my sweatshirt, and I go out, I went outside to talk to her, and she's not there. And when you see the surveillance footage, you see him walk out, and you see him looking around, and he's not running. He's not like, "Hey, I just raped somebody. I gotta get out of here." He's looking around. So he says, I didn't see her, so I went and got in my car, and then I texted her to see where she was, or he tried to call her. That's her second missed call at 9:55. So these two were going at it for like 30 minutes. Now, he does admit that at one point during their encounter, he had reached around and grabbed her by the neck with one of his hands. The other hand was, like on her boob or something. I don't know. And he described it all. But, and he was choking her. He admits, "I was choking her, but not to unconsciousness. She didn't urinate or defecate. It was..." And that's consistent with the evidence, because she does have that petechiae eye. But he was asked, "Did you hit her?" "No, I don't hit women. I wasn't raised that way. I just would never hit a woman. I didn't do it." "Well, what about the belt?" "The belt's not mine. I don't know where that belt came from. It isn't mine. I didn't bring it. I don't know where it came from. Not my belt." Yeah. So meanwhile, I'm looking over in the courtroom, and the victim is sitting on the other side of the courtroom, and she's text messaging. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack this whole time. So his attorney, she walks him through the sex, step by step. So he tells Skylar during their conversation before she goes out to get air that this is going to be their last time. So this was kind of his last hurrah. He knew that she was also in a relationship, and he says she didn't take it well. She sits up. They continue brief conversation. She was mad that he came all this way and doesn't want to, and I can't remember, I wrote something that didn't come out right on spell check. So I don't know what that last word was. She says she's going outside to get some air. He starts getting dressed, picks up his hoodie, goes outside. She's not there. Okay, so I read all that to you. So then he drives off after she doesn't answer. He just starts going home. He doesn't learn until the next day that he's been accused of rape. So on cross-examination, he says, "I was on that porch for a couple of minutes," and you don't see that in the surveillance footage. What you see is he walks up, and then the next clip, you see him. Well, you don't even see him. You see the door closing. And she says it's because it's her camera's motion activated, and if he's just standing still, it's not going to keep recording. But he wasn't standing still. He walked into the door, and clearly it's not going to just catch the first few seconds, because when you walked out that door 30 minutes later, it kept going the whole time you were walking away. It didn't stop. So I don't know. Where's the rest of that footage? Anyway. So it looked on the surveillance footage like he was not wearing pants, because in the dark pants look white. They have like an opposite effect. So he said, "No, I was wearing dark blue, sweatpants, which would not necessitate the need for a belt." And he had a pair of keys hanging out, so you could see the keys hanging out of his pocket. Then the defense attorney at this point, I remember yesterday she tried to admit pictures of him with tattoos on his legs. Well, now she gets it in through him. So we see that he has tattoos on his legs. He said he is still with the same girlfriend. This was sort of a last fling. He says, punching a woman is out of my league. They had wet, nasty sex. She gives him oral whenever they have sex. He drove down there because he missed her. And then he says something really interesting. He says, a normal woman is not going to take a penis into her mouth that she doesn't want in there. She could rip it off with her teeth. And the jury was laughing about that. So during this, he said at one point during this encounter, she even called him Zaid. Zaid is the stalker in the book that comes in and, I'm guessing eventually has sex with this woman that's living in the haunted house. I just haven't gotten there in the book. He said he was supposed to just walk into the house, but the door was locked, so he had to call her. He said the nicknames are what they call each other since they read the book, the little mouse and the kitty cat thing. Now at this point I'm thinking, who do you believe? Do you believe her? Do you believe him? Wow. But, this guy has no criminal record. He's never been in trouble with the law. They're acting out a fantasy that's in this book, and she's upset with him because, hey, you come all this way and now you're going to tell me mid-sex that you have a girlfriend. I'd be kind of pissed off too. I really would. Now, I don't think I would take it as far as she took it. But he is facing, if he's convicted, a minimum of about 12 years in jail. That's the 12-year sentence is for somebody with no criminal history, all the way up to life in prison. So that's what he's facing. So now the state gets up for their cross-examination, and he says, let's see what we can agree upon. And he starts going through things that they can agree upon. Really, he stuck to his story. He didn't crack. He just maintained his story throughout. Every time he was asked to describe what went on, he gave the same story. So in my mind, he came off more believable than she did. That was how I felt. I felt like at this point that these two people, because remember, the truth is always somewhere in between the two stories. These two people got caught up into something that they were in over their heads, and she didn't like it, especially when he stopped and said, "Hey, I got a girlfriend," which was kind of stupid, but anyway. So then they go into closing arguments after lunch. And I want to go over the closing argument for the state. Now, one thing that the jury doesn't know is that this poor prosecutor, he didn't get this case until just a few days before the trial starts. Trial started on Monday. I heard the judge said at one point that he got the case on Thursday. Then at another point, I heard he got it on Sunday. Like, he didn't have a lot of time to prepare for this case. So as far as the aggravated burglary goes, he argued to the jury that this Caitlin entered the residence without permission, that they hadn't talked in over a month. He didn't tell her he was in town, said he was just getting off work. And he did say that. when they texted about 7:30 that evening, he had said that he was just getting off work. And she said, what time? And he said 9:30. But at this point, he's driving over to Wichita. So said she knew he was coming, but the door was locked and the dog was not put up. So if she knew he was coming, why wouldn't she have unlocked that exterior door? Well, the interior door was unlocked. Maybe she forgot about the exterior door. I don't know. So, and she was still in her pajamas. So, but that just says to me that, his explanation of that was that's what she always wore. Every time I would come to visit her and we would have sex, that's what she was wearing. And he talked about that he had the intent to commit a rape once he got into the house, that this whole thing was sexually motivated, that he planned it before he even left Kansas City, and that he had admitted it. Then he talked about the aggravated domestic battery. He said that he knowingly impeded her normal breathing or circulation of the blood by applying pressure to her neck until she saw stars. And, because Skylar says, or the victim says, that he did it right after he came into the door. That was like the first thing he did was choke her with both hands, and then he did it again on the couch. So there's a difference in their stories there. That he did it in a rude, insulting, or angry manner. He says, there's no nice way to strangle someone, and that they were in a dating relationship. Now, I don't know that I would agree with that. I don't know. So that he knowingly caused her physical contact with her in a rude, insulting, angry manner, that he hit her in the head 2 to 3 times in the middle of this forceful rape after choking her, and then said, you gave away my pussy. And he did say when he was on set, he said, I don't talk during sex. He said, listen, this was, on a scale of where you could go with these rapes, this was very vanilla. This was, it can become very, very violent. It just depends on what you're agreeing to. And he says, I'm not a forceful person. She told me to be forceful. So he was asked, well, what was the forceful part? Well, I pushed her. I ripped her shorts. I choked her a little bit, So with regard to the sodomy, he grabbed her head, tried to force her towards his penis, and he was standing in front of her with his penis exposed. That's the whole sodomy thing. In the middle of this forcible rape after choking her. And then he failed to complete the act. I'm reading off this PowerPoint that the prosecutor was presenting. So sodomy, to me, I guess I didn't understand the full definition of sodomy, but it's anytime you have oral contact with the male genitalia, that's sodomy. Okay. So he engaged in sodomy with her. She didn't consent to it, and she was overcome by force or fear. Then he talks about the rape. He said, they were engaged in sexual intercourse, that he penetrated her. She did not consent, and it was under circumstances where she was overcome by force or fear. That he was choking her, would not let her leave. He tried to tie her with a belt. Now, I never heard her say that. He brought the belt. She says he brought the belt out. She took it away from him and threw it. I don't know what his intention was with the belt, but he says he didn't even talk about the belt. He's, in his version of the story, the belt's not even part of the story. He hit her. He admitted he overcame her by force. So then the prosecutor shows some body cam footage of her crying, sobbing on this front stair when the police officer's asking. He says, does this look like a woman who consented? And then he put up the PowerPoint and says, does reading dark romance mean you can't be raped? No. Yes, of course you can still be raped even though you read dark romance. But if you have an agreement with someone during the 7-minute phone call that this is what's going to take place, maybe it should have been more than a 7-minute phone call between these two. I get it. But I think what these two were attempting to do was recreate what went on in this book. That's what I think. And then she had regrets afterwards. So the defense gets up and they do their closing. Stephanie Burton, and she's so good. Honestly, she's really, really good. And she argues, that the victim did not give the police the context of what was occurring here. In other words, the book, the role playing that they were doing. These are two people that knew each other, that had this sexual encounter, and basically she tells the jury it boils down to who do you believe? Who is more credible, my client or this woman who's got what do they call it? Borderline personality disorder, and was on marijuana, alcohol, cocaine, and benzodiazepines that night. Who are you going to believe? Now, she says, I'm not trying to shame her by saying, here's what she was on that night. She deserved to be raped. I'm just saying that, I think she regretted what happened. She agreed with him that this is what they were going to do. And then when he said he had a girlfriend, she went into these histrionics. So, she goes out of her way to message him on Facebook. She didn't have to reply to him. When he said, hey, on the phone, she could have just left it. She was blocked. She didn't have, but she goes out of her way. She goes over to Facebook, friends him. He has to accept a friendship. Then they start, so. And then she talked about the missing footage on the porch. And the other thing she points out is like when you don't hear anything. Like at one point on the surveillance, you could hear a train. So there was audio to that surveillance. You never hear anything going on, like as he's closing the door and coming into the house, you don't hear any, you don't hear anything. So, but Ms. Burton did something that I thought was very interesting. She walked through the sexual act and she said, you don't stop every few minutes and say, okay, is this okay? I'm going to reach over here and I'm going to choke you. Is that okay? It's just like a one continuous thing. And she says, nobody's flipping anybody over, because she was saying she was flipped over here and then he flipped her over here. And because this woman she's actually larger than he is. She's taller than he is. She's not a small woman. She said that just didn't happen. She got up and she changed position as you do when you're having sex. You change positions. She says, especially when you're young, you get up, you change position. She says, my client's only guilty of like stupidity because in the middle of this act, he decided he's going to have a conscience and tell her that he's got a girlfriend. She goes, it could have been a whole different kind of a crime at this point. So, but she goes through the whole sexual encounter and she said, this was, this was just two people who were acting this, to me, I'm thinking these is two people who were acting out roles in this book. And unfortunately, he decides he don't want to continue. I'm out. And remember, they never found his semen anywhere. He didn't complete the act. He was like, I'm out. I'm done. And at that point, he backs away. She moves past him, goes out the door to get some fresh air. And she's crying. She's upset because of what he just told her. And in the middle of this sexual encounter. And she's probably a little embarrassed about the whole thing as well, I'm thinking. But in any case, so the jury starts to deliberate. And this was about 2:30 on Thursday, and they deliberated for a couple of hours. About 4:30, 5 o'clock-ish, they come back and they want to hear a read back of the testimony of the sister-in-law, the one that called 911. And they want to read back the testimony of the victim of what occurred before she was taken over to the house by the police to get her things. So the judge says, well, we're going to come back in the morning. Everybody's going to go home. We're going to come back in the morning and do this in the morning. So we come back in the morning, and the testimony is read back. The jury goes back, and in about an hour and a half later, they come back with a verdict. So once everybody was in the courtroom, including the victim and a friend of hers, the verdict was read by the clerk, and the jury found him not guilty on all charges. Now, I'm just going to tell you, by this point, I've been sitting there a long time while these deliberations are going on. I've had conversations with this defendant. We had a very nice conversation about video games, and we both play Xbox video games, and I've met his mother, I've met his two brothers, I've met his father, I've talked to his attorney, I've talked to the prosecutor, and I just found his version of the events to be more credible. And even if you take away the fact that I've gotten to know all these people, had I been a juror, I was convinced because, number one, where he's calling you at right before he walks in the door. You could have looked. You could have saw that it was him. You didn't have to let him in the house. But you did. We know that there was a 7-minute phone call. He explained what the 7-minute phone call was about, but you didn't. I'm trying to think what she said that 7-minute phone call was about. Let me go back here and see if she actually explained the 7-minute phone call. Okay, she claimed that during the 7-minute conversation, he did not mention he was driving over from Kansas City. But she doesn't talk anything about the substance of that phone call. So once the verdict was read, she was quite upset. So she left the courtroom with her friend, and the prosecutor walked her out. I think the victim advocate was with her as well, and they walked her out. But I waited around because I wanted to hear from the jury what their thoughts were. So I know the judge went in to talk to them. So I was waiting and waiting, and they're not coming out. So finally, I just go downstairs and I sit down there for a little while. And then I get up and I'm thinking, I don't know what, maybe they went out a different exit. I don't see these people. So I start to walk out, and then here they come right behind me. So I open the door for them, and they started talking to me. And they said that there just wasn't enough there for them to convict him. That, for them to be convinced beyond a reasonable doubt that he had committed a rape, that there just was not enough evidence for them to do that. They did tell me that there was one holdout, which is why the deliberations were so lengthy. They told me who that person was, but I'm not going to mention it here. But the way they convinced this person was they talked about, because in the pictures you see this coffee table right next to the couch. And the victim had said at one point during this rape, alleged rape, that he had swiped the clothes that were on the couch and that, they felt like that had he done that and had there been this struggle, that things would have been knocked over. There were liquor bottles all over the floor, but she said those had been there before that. That no, he didn't knock those over. But nothing was knocked over on this coffee table. And that's what they used to convince the final juror that it didn't go the way she said it would. So that there was not evidence beyond a reasonable doubt for them to be able to convict this guy. They agreed. They said, where's the rest of the porch video? They were looking for it. They talked about the fact that this probably never should have been filed by the prosecution. And I agree with that. I had said that early on. Why did they even file this case? She got her version of events, his version of events, no evidence to support one way or the other whose version of the events is correct. So the truth is lying somewhere in between. So it's quite a gamble to spend the money to prosecute this case, and they did. And I think that's probably why they went through so many prosecutors, 4 different prosecutors, the last of whom got the case just a couple of days before he had to go try it, which was, patently unfair to him. I feel like it was. So interesting outcome to this case. Let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you guys in the next video. I gotta go lay down. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.